everyone. Welcome to the Nested Healing Podcast. I am your host, Jess Bastian, and today we have three lovely guests discussing the topic of emotional stream, the heart center, and how that impacts trauma and how trauma impacts it and how we humans survive. Today, I am surrounded by three lovely, lovely guests. First, we have Rebecca. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jess. I'm Rebecca Cross, and I'm zooming in from Maine. And I am a mom of two amazing teens, um, and also the director of an adult education partnership.
Well, thank you for being here. And next, we have Libby. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Succi, but I go by Libby. I am zooming in from Maine. I am a single mother of two, and I am a volunteer recovery coach with the state of Maine.
Well, thank you so much for being here as well. And finally, we have the wonderful Patrick. Would you like to hello?
Thanks, Jess. My name is Patrick Collins, and I am an executive and life coach in San Francisco. I work with clients in the corporate world, but also in life coaching, where I deal with issues more related to what NI2C does. And I'm trained, like Jen, as an integral coach at New Ventures West in San Francisco.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to kind of start this topic with kind of a two-part question, which is how does emotions impact people's perspectives, and then also like how can trauma be a contributing factor to the emotional impact of those perspectives? I wanted to open the floor up to you guys and get your insight.
I'm happy to start. I mean, I was doing some reading before this and confirmed that current research says that about 90% of our decisions and behavior comes from the emotional parts of our body and brain, and that 10% is from the kind of cortex, the reasoning. And I think we don't always remember that. We think we're very rational, but in fact we're very emotional. And so from my perspective, trauma impairs the emotional system, and we can talk about how, but I think the emotional system is essential to making good decisions, forming healthy relationships, protecting ourselves. And it gets distorted and sometimes even shut down by trauma.
I think personally, both in my own life and in people that I'm close with, so I have a little more like insider experience with them. I think that one way that trauma might impact emotions is like the volume. So, for example, in my life, I grew up in a home in a situation where emotions were terrifying because they were connected to. So, my mother had some mental health challenges, and so emotions for her were not sort of tempered with another center, like a head center, and they were scary. And so for me, I liked for a very long time, and I'm really emotions on a very low volume because they didn't feel they felt more manageable that way. You can barely hear them, and so I that has worked well for me for some amount of time, and it's something that I'm working to adjust now, like to a healthy volume. I also think sometimes trauma might make emotions on volume 10. Like for whatever reason, that one I don't have as much personal experience with, but I feel like I've witnessed that where they're just so huge that there isn't any hearing. I guess, yeah, you can't hear the other person's experience or that your own sort of head center because they're so loud. So yeah, I think trauma might impact the volume of emotions.
Mhm.
I believe that trauma can definitely change a person. They could be happy-go-lucky and something happens and now they kind of hibernate. Um, uh,
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think getting to like what Patrick said is like, I think in society we get told to not think about like with our hearts and to think
Mm.
with our emotions, but we're creatures, we're animals, and it's literally impossible. It's built into us. That's emotional, not necessarily even like regulation. It's just like our personalities, how we deal with things and everything. Um, and before we get into like kind of the how, because there's a part of me that really wants to dig into like how emotions do all of that. I want to kind of address so the audience like understands kind of what the lingo we're using and everything. What Rebecca, like what you mean by like, oh, the heart center or the head center, maybe so they can understand like the difference or like what we're talking about. If anyone wants to like jump in.
Well, the the head center and heart center and body center, um, they are new learning for me. So I think they might be better explained by another person in our group. Yeah.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I mean, there's a model that we use in integral coaching, which is the three centers, and it's exactly what Rebecca mentioned: is you have a head center, heart center, and a body center, and we think of them as really three sources of intelligence. They really are. In fact, with like neuroscience, there's more um, endocrine receptors in your gut than there are in your brain. It's amazing. So it really, we have these notions, we divide up the body in these ways that actually aren't how the body is built. And so what we do in integral coaching is try to help clients draw from all three of those centers. And typically what happens is, in our culture, people are taught that, especially men, emotions aren't good. They need to regulate their emotions, and they can turn off some of the wisdom that comes from their hearts, and that the body is kind of the deep knowing. People talk about like a gut instinct that they feel in their body. Like, I just knew it was right for me, or, an aching heart. Like we all hear these things, the lump in the throat, like the body, the body has these intelligence centers. And when they're in balance, everything is easier. We know what we want. We're attracted to the right people in our lives. We're in the right kind of work because we know our strengths. We know what feeds us. It's just beautiful to see. And so that's a lot of what integral coaches do, is we assess people on what centers are firing and which ones need support. And back to this, trauma topic, I think that one of the most damaging aspects of trauma is making it unsafe to feel into the heart and body centers, because the trauma can live in those centers, and it's too much. And so people, retreat to their minds. But then all this stored up emotion is in their bodies, in their hearts and in their gut, and it needs to be unpacked in a safe way. It needs to be revisited in a safe environment, and that's part of what people do in trauma healing. Is to be able to go back in a safe way. And I think that supports then the healthy function of the emotional system, where it can get back to serving its purpose, versus being frozen, being suppressed.
Thank you for doing that. I appreciate your explanation. I really do. A plus.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite models in our coaching, is the three centers. It was fun to hear you guys saying that. I didn't know that I guess you were exposed to it through NI2C.
Repair.
Yeah, through Repair. That's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one of the fundamentals of being like the repair program is
Mm.
is like, I would say it's one of the core teachings of just being like, hey, your body is a system.
Mm.
And you can't live without one thing. It's like in one of our other episodes, James Flannery, the
Sorry.
yeah, kind of the creator of integral coaching and everything.
Yeah.
He brings up the idea of like a sore elbow, where it's like you go to the doctor, they go and they target the sore elbow, but they don't always look at the wrist or the shoulder.
Mm.
To kind of basically quote him, and how you could like chop off the arm, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? You're not solving it. You're just thinking you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when, especially with human emotions, especially with the heart center, I personally feel like in my mind too, I'm a very mind person. I spend a lot of time up here. A lot of my stuff spends a lot of time in my guts. I feel like I neglect my heart a lot. It's just like, I feel like I forgot where I was going with this, but like it's all connected. It's all there.
I feel like I am more of a heart person because my trauma has hurt me so much that now, that I've worked through it, I just want to help people, and I want people to feel that love and careness that I had been lacking back when I was hurting. So, I spend a lot of time helping others or trying to figure out how I can help somebody.
Beautiful. Sounds like you reclaimed your heart center.
Yes, I did.
Oh, good for you.
Congratulations, that's a very big feat.
It's no small thing.
God.
It's not.
Yeah. And to keep it.
I mean, you spend a lot of years battling, your mind and your body, and you don't have any time for your heart. So, once you're finally able to, or, like I said, whatnot, work on your trauma, that's when, you just rise and figure out, exactly what it is that you want.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went from there.
That's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. I often, when I work with clients who really aren't in touch with their hearts, I talk to them about it as a compass, it's like this inner compass that you find that does tell you where to go. And I think this also speaks to, well, how do we change the impacts of trauma in our emotional system? Like what are the mechanics of that? And it sounds like, Libby, you're practicing heart-centered activities. Your giving is your way. I'm hearing, tell me if I'm right. I'm hearing you say, I stay in my heart by providing service, by giving back.
Yep, absolutely.
And so I think that really speaks to, these aren't intellectual concepts. We have to live them. We have to, and to keep the heart open. Otherwise, it can be visits with the heart. It's not there all the time. It's like it might open and then close again. But finding practices that support staying with all the centers is important for people recovering from trauma.
And it can be hard. You got to love yourself because you deserve that. You deserve love. Everybody deserves love.
Yeah.
So,
I think, sorry, from my personal experience, I feel like a lot of, and not only my personal experience, but I feel like a lot of people around me spend a lot of time fighting, like their internal selves.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like maybe some of the viewers will like relate to that, where it's like you feel the constant need to fight everything, and I find that almost like relaxing into it and accepting it has made the most progress. And I think that's something, I feel like it's something that's almost taught, to like constantly fight and fit like molds almost. I feel like mold, like how in society we create like the idea of like a perfect person. I feel like that is almost so detrimental because it causes us to fight who we are inside, and fight and separate the systems, separate the body from the self, from the soul, from whatever you may call it. Yeah. What are your guys' kind
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I feel one of the most damaging emotional aspects of trauma is the loss of the self-care and the self-love, right? And that's because people with trauma often end up on some level blaming themselves, for putting up with the trauma, or are just so diminished. They're invalidated, they're demeaned, their support is pulled out from under them. And the path to healing does require attending to ourselves and loving ourselves. And the more the self-love, the more we can see what's really true. What is the state of our life, and what do we need? But it's to me, it's one of the sad things about trauma is the ongoing way that we would maybe create new difficulties in our lives because of these impairments from the original trauma, right? We're running with an impaired emotional system, so our compass isn't working. And for example, we might have a relational template which brings us into close relationship with people who aren't good for us, because that's what we learned. We have a kind of a trauma bond in our background where I know how to relate from this template, what my role is. And so it feels very comfortable, but it's an emotional distortion because it's actually not a healthy relationship. And so these are the kinds of things that then lead to like adult difficulties. Even if the trauma was an interpersonal like childhood trauma, you kind of recreate it because you have these distorted emotional, templates, and you're not able to say, no, that person's really not good for me. You might be drawn to someone who's not good for you. And so it gets very tricky because now we have the original trauma, and then we have the life we lived based on the trauma, the traumatic template, and these impaired emotions that guided us to the wrong things.
I agree 100% with that. They a lot of times also will self-sabotage
Mm-hmm.
because they don't believe that they deserve
Yeah.
good
Yes.
because of their trauma. So yeah, it might be getting in an unhealthy relationship, or they could be working, going to school, doing well, and as soon as things start doing well, they just nope, nope, it's not comfortable. It makes them feel
Yes.
like something's wrong because they've never known the actual joy, what's healthy. So a lot of times they just stay on that unhealthy path.
And I think, well, for myself, I feel really seen by what you were saying, Patrick, in terms of like continuously engaging in relationships that aren't um, healthy or fulfilling. But I also think, and that happens to me, it has happened historically without my awareness. I think now I'm building awareness. But I think also it can, people can even be aware of it and still crave the other thing. I had a student who said to me once, she was finally in a stable situation, place to stay, bed to sleep in, food, training, education. She was doing student government, all these things, and she's like, Miss, I'm just craving some friction. I just need that friction. Like there's no friction here. And she was so cool that she could articulate like, I'm doing great. And where is that? Where's the rub? Like I want that because that's what had been familiar to her.
Yeah.
Patrick, you were talking about like the internal compass of the heart center and like a loss of self-care and self-love. And I think even like a whole loss of self, never mind the love or the care, like looking inward and saying, I don't even know. Like I have stuffed that my feelings about all things so deep that I couldn't even tell you. Like so I want to give that self-love and that care, but like I don't know. I don't and so that's like another piece I think that can happen.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up that thread because that was one of the things I wanted to talk about today is like an extreme form of emotional impact of trauma is dissociation, where things are so traumatic that we're not able to stay with what's happening and we kind of vacate, the situation. Um, and it's very adaptive. I guess the human organism has this, way of dealing with the intolerable. But then what happens is those memories are pushed down so deep that we don't have access to them. So if I could just speak personally, for me, I knew these things happened to me, but if I spoke about it, it was as if it happened to another person. I had no emotional connection to things that, were horrific. And so for much of my life, I was in talk therapy, knowing that this must be why I'm having these problems, because these things happened, but I couldn't connect to it. It wasn't really me. It was like it was someone else. And I just talk in a perfectly rational voice about, horrific abuse. And it was much later in life that I learned, to start to access that and sort of remetabolize what had happened, to really feel what the emotions were that were associated with these events. And I've come up with this metaphor for these dissociated experiences. I call them, it just in my own, I do a lot of writing and work with people who are on this path. And so I call it like unexploded bombs. It's like there was this bomb that went off and you took it and you said, that's too, that's dangerous. I'm gonna hide that away so it doesn't hurt anyone. And then you have to kind of like blow it up, in a safe space, in a safe container, in therapy, coaching, whatever method you're using, to kind of reclaim yourself, to recover from that experience. It's a very extreme form. I mean, I think most trauma doesn't involve in dissociation. Mine did. And so it just made the journey much harder because I kind of didn't know where to look. It left me with so many questions, like, why am I like this? Why do I have these problems? And I was a mystery to myself, is what I would say, because of dissociation. And as I healed, I'm not a mystery to myself. If something's going on in my body, I can usually connect to what is the emotional cause, like why, because for me, I experience things somatically. Like some people have depression or anxiety. For me, it's like I would manifest illnesses, like medically unexplained illnesses, one after another, and that's the family pattern. So anyway, I just feel like that's something is very empowering to know that, that this dissociative thing is adaptive. It's a healthy response, but then it needs to be attended to later. And it takes a lot of professional help, I think, typically, and a lot of safety.
Thank you so
And,
much for that.
yeah.
In my mind, what it brings up too is like the different forms of how we process trauma, big T or little t. I like to
Mhm.
distinguish them because I think it's not only that I think it's fun, it's just I think an interesting way of like understanding and processing it. Um, but like also the idea and the demonization and the imposter syndrome that comes with self-care and self-love. I know for me, I have a tendency of like when I'm doing self-care or something, there's a bit of imposter syndrome or an idea of this is narcissistic of me to take care of myself. And I feel like that tends to be a bit of a common ideology of like self-care is narcissism, and really it's not. It's taking care, it's nurturing, it's taking care, it's part of the whole way of processing and everything. And I want to see if you guys have any like relation or commentary on
I actually had somebody ask me not too long ago why I had a problem doing things for myself. And I said, honestly, I feel guilty. I feel guilt. I shouldn't, and I'm working on that, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're such good learners, as social creatures. We figure out what's okay and how to belong in our families. And I just think our culture in general isn't very good at modeling that self-care is not selfish, that it's actually generous in many ways, that when you care for yourself, you really can be the best person you can be. Um, and yeah, for me, I think I got the strong conditioning that it wasn't okay to even like just go to like routine doctor's appointments and things. Like it would bring up anxiety for me, and I would avoid things that were, for me, it was like my conditioning was, that I needed to take care of others and to focus on myself was selfish.
Yeah, like if the messaging has been that having a need is
Mhm.
maybe traitorous or you know, a burdensome, heavy lift, then the notion of self-care would be, of course, completely
Mhm.
unacceptable because like think need and then sort of some self-care if you had your basic needs met, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like I gotta ask a question then, like how did you guys kind of get out of it? How are you guys working on that? How do you work with yourself? I feel um like how is that approach for you guys? Because I know for myself, the way I altered it is in my mind is if I'm not okay, I can't take care of myself. I can't take care of others, right? And I feel like not always people have that kind of mentality. I know at some point that can be a toxic mentality.
Mhm.
And I think I constantly have to check in with myself. I don't know if you guys relate to that. Like, I have to check in and be like, hey, I am really tired. And yes, I have a million things on my plate. Let me do a to do list and then write them down and then be like, okay, well, today I'm tired at this point. If I'm tired, I'm not going to be able to do my best work. And now I'm just going to take a bath, and that is my self care. How do you guys do? You guys have a similar process, or what's your approach?
I think I might ask myself, I have like, just like that internal voice that we all have. And I might say to myself, if you were being um, most self-respecting, what would you do for yourself right now? And like that way, if I'm asking myself a question, I can respond more. I do struggle with that feeling of like indulgence or something. So if I remember to connect caring for myself with self respect and how I just want all people to feel respect, then I can take that step to do the thing, whether it's a healthy breakfast or wash the sheets and make the bed nicely for myself later or something like that. Like that's self respecting. And I want that for me and everyone, my children. So I connect it to a question like that.
I can share. I think there's kind of different levels to this question, in terms of like how do we get to the point where we can, feel secure and safe in our self-care, and then like how do you actually make it happen? How do you like once you recognize what you need, how do you build it in? So for me, like daily practice is just essential. I just have to have it as a routine. And for me, the big self-care, most important is with my emotions because I have to attend to them. And so I do practices in the morning, first thing before I start the day. I've been a meditator, but I use a lot of breath work and things like that to get back to center and figure out what's in my emotional system and move emotions that might be stuck. And it's just I think it's taken a long time to feel um, that it's okay to do that. I don't have to be productive in some outer sense, that attending to this, my inner world is really valid. And yeah, it took a long time of therapy and other things to let go of those self-defeating, beliefs. But now that I kind of know myself and I know what the minimum requirements are for this, to be a good coach and a good teacher because I teach and I just have to do that self-care every morning. It's just that's the foundation.
I like to wake up and say something positive to myself.
Mhm.
Might be about myself, but or it might just be you're gonna have a good day. um, Throughout the day, especially lately since I've been working with my repair class, I am noticing when I'm feeling distressed or, I might even just be a little more ramped up. So I'll say, okay, you need to do some breathing. And
Mhm.
I have a little routine there. And I've been doing that at least twice a day. And I've noticed that I'm I'm more regulated and I'm actually more happy. And I like to bathe, take nice hot bath. It relieves my stress. Sometimes I'll light a candle because the smell of my favorite candle. Um, and I might journal.
How does emotions and our brain processing emotions as like what is your guys' viewpoint on it? And I guess like my root of my question really was how does that compare to like our societal influences? If there's understanding there.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I'm sorry. So I'm going to say back what I heard you say, which is
Okay.
how does emotion in fact impact out how our brains are processing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically like how do we process like our environment into emotions and how does that perspective lead to things basically?
Hmm. Okay.
Well, um, sometimes it seems like um, somebody's. I'm thinking about people that are close to me in my life. It's not, maybe it's a little harder for me to speak personally about this because the challenge that I'm having is accessing emotions. But something I've noticed is it's almost as though the emotional response to whatever's happening might be like kind of predictive. So like it might impact the processing because whatever emotion's coming up is like connected to something that happened before. And so even though, the exchange is about something that's happening now, um, the processing, it's not really processing in real time, but like maybe the emotions are connected, or sort of, oh, this is last time I heard this word or I felt this dynamic. This is the emotional response I had. So it I don't know if it time hops or if it just sort of ignites that emotional reaction based on something from an exchange from the past. Is that coming? Are you picking
Yeah.
up, putting down here?
No, I do. I like the word direction you're going, and I'll try to, flesh it out from like a coaching perspective. So the way I would answer Jess's question is along the same lines of I think we have a lot of emotional learning that takes place earlier in our life, right? About what's approved, what's disapproved. And we have an incredibly strong need to belong, right? Our survival depends on the people around us as when we're young. And then we carry that learning into, the rest of our lives. And so, for example, I'm working with a client who takes care of other people too much, doesn't take care of himself, just like this theme we're talking about self-care. And it's the emotional learning that took place in the past, right, that is guiding the behavior in the present. He's recognized cognitively that, oh, I need to set better boundaries at work, and I need to be in healthier relationships where I'm not always just helping other people, or I'm actually getting my needs met. But it's not happening in his life because this emotional learning is so fundamental. It's wired into his brain now, and it's going to take some time to change that pattern. So the current environment brings in a stimulus, like someone at work looks like they need help, and he jumps to help. He's the first one to volunteer because of that learning, right? And then the process is to be able to see what's really happening, but not to blame, for this emotional learning, because it's emotional. It's not cognitive. You're smarter than that, but your emotional responses are quicker than your mind, and they're often unconscious. And so there's this whole process that I think of like healing and evolving is to observe this emotional learning that took place and see how it manifests, but to also not blame oneself because of that, because it was you didn't control the environment you were born into and what was rewarded and what was frowned on and what was verboten and all of that. So I think we're just such social creatures that this part of us is very quickly learned and very hard to unlearn.
And I think like the curiosity and instead you were saying something like not chastising ourselves for
Yeah.
that that reactivity or that habit, emotional energy, but like observing, I think is the word you used. And I think
Yeah.
like observing with interested curiosity, like an inquiry, like what is happening within me, is a gentle and productive way to learn about those responses.
Yeah.
I think allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling, because I think sometimes, like for me, I wouldn't allow myself to have a thought about whatever was going on. Um, if it was negative, I just avoided it, avoided it. I don't like this feeling, so I'd avoid it. But being able to actually allow myself to feel what I was feeling was that I was actually able to heal myself, and not just the negative, but also the positive, and know that it doesn't always have to feel like this. And that I could change the outcome of my emotion if I allowed myself to feel it. So I was knowing why I felt like that.
Yeah. Good for you. Well, I think, I mean, you're both of Rebecca and Libby, you're both making me think about one of the, back to this like main thread of like, what is the impact of trauma on emotions? I think one of the impacts is to make it harder for people to be with their emotions, right? That there can be an intolerance, a pushing away of the emotions because there is so much negative. It can be overwhelming. And part of the healing is to reclaim the ability to feel like Libby's saying, you know, what's really happening. Because when that happens, it usually completes and it leads you somewhere. Whereas if it's pushed away, that's my belief in the model that I subscribe to, is that when we don't feel our emotions, then we have anxiety and depression and these other kinds of things are as a result of not being able to fully experience our emotions. And so the kinds of therapy that helped me as I went on my journey were ones that really went directly towards the emotion versus just cognitive therapy and being in a story and trying to reframe things. It was really emotionally focused therapy.
Yeah, Patrick, you're reminding me a lot of Besser von Folk's book, The Body Keeps the Score,
Yeah.
and how a lot of his work was founded in not necessarily talk therapy, but like actually being there to be supportive for people. And I find a lot of his work, because for me, I've been in talk therapy for most of my life, and I never made enough progress as I have doing like integral coaching. I don't know why that was a hard word, but yeah, and I read his book probably around this time last year, and I was like, the way his methodologies were, which was to sit down with people to hear their whole story, to know that they're like an individual who has complex emotions, who are going through things and they need those emotions addressed,
Yeah.
more so than being just in a problem all the time.
Yeah.
It just really reminded me of that.
Well, he's one of my heroes, so you know, maybe that's why. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very
Yeah, I think the mental health system is so set up to focus on the end result of these emotional issues. Like, oh, you have a diagnosis of, you know, generalized anxiety disorder or, major depression. But I think Bessel is one of those rare, you know, researcher clinicians who um, really looked at the deeper cause, like why. Where I come from as a coach and just as a human is I have a very strong belief that this wholeness in all of us that can be reclaimed, you know, that it's a hard path and it takes some dedication and some resources. It's hard to do it on your own. Over time, it gets easier, but I really believe we can all heal, you know, and kind of like my life is like, if I could heal, kind of anyone could heal. It's kind of like, no, you know, not that it's easy, but just it's given me my purpose and my work, you know, my own, like I never thought I could feel this happy and healthy. I didn't think it would happen in this lifetime and to be so at peace with everything. And so I know people like Bessel and Gabor Mate for me is another hero because his writing on trauma and his understanding of trauma and his deep understanding of human beings, they both have a very optimistic lens, and I think that's where people with trauma really end up having to find the resources that support them, and it's often not the mainstream resources. It's not 20 sessions of talk therapy that get them to the root of these things. You really have to go on your own path to find the supports and the resources.
I really like how you said that. It, and I believe that not everything can be fixed with medication.
Yeah.
It sounds like these two people you're talking about, like they generally really care. They really want to know what is causing,
Mhm.
somebody pain. And that, if you can work on that, you might not need that. You might not need the medication.
Yeah.
You might just need somebody to talk to and help you through it.
Mhm. That's been, my experience. I do, like I said, I work in my life coaching, kind of what I call like the deeper end of the pool. I work with people who have diagnoses and some pretty serious, issues. And, we always work with their psychiatrist if they're on medications. It's not like, I'm not a medical doctor, but I've helped many people either reduce or eliminate medications by helping them find the right therapies, that to go to the root of it. And there are some people who absolutely have to stay on their medications. That is the responsible thing for the long term. But there's others who it was just they didn't know what else to do, and they didn't know that these other types of therapy existed that would support them going to, really reclaiming their emotions. And so that's kind of a mission for me, is to help people find those resources. And I think this is where the optimism comes from too, is it's not just from like my personal experience of like, I feel like I kind of got, through the really hard parts, but also that we're in this golden era of therapies. I mean, there's so many different therapies available. There's so many amazing tools now. And so I feel, we have all the, we have meditation and breath work and, these things that are ancient. And then we have new things, that have been invented more recently. And it feels like there's a lot out there for people now that's accessible.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I found that like almost in one of our other episodes once again with James, we were talking about that like sometimes one therapy doesn't hold all the answers. Sometimes you gotta mix it up. You gotta pull from what works. It's less about what therapy works for you and what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And like who you as a person are and what foundation you and I find in integral coaching and through NI2C doing the repair program, working with different coaches, um, that's been what's key for me. Is like I've done one thing. I was in talk therapy years of my life, and I would just run in a circle all the time, constantly. I named that part of my brain like a road runner in a hamster ball or like one of those wheels spinning all the time, but it's spinning so fast because I know what the problem is. I'm aware of it, but I'm not able to break it, right?
Mhm.
And for me, I just had to go, I just had to step out of the wheel, right? Out of the wheel and see that, oh, this is a cage. I can get out of this. There's a front door, right? It's like, oh, it was literally to the right of me or my left. I was just so stuck and everything. And for me, that's been one of the better things is just realizing, oh, okay, this one thing didn't work. Let's pivot to something that did. These qualities worked. Okay, then what's something that has more of this quality?
Yeah.
And I find that not only like gratifying for my mind, but also gratifying for my heart and my emotions. And
Mhm.
it allows for me to take a breath in that way.
What you're saying reminds me of how I feel when I change my workout routine. So there is actually, I'm to say routine is just silly because really the whole thing is just going jogging every morning. That's the routine. But so you'd think like 30 years of jogging every morning, my legs would be really fit. And in one way they are. But if I go for a bike ride, I'm still using the legs, but I might be sore the next day. So it's just the different muscles. And it's not that the running isn't beneficial, but it's that I needed something else to target other things.
Mhm.
And then another thing that I think when we're speaking about like having the right kind of help and the process that this type of healing is or entails is like such sophisticated help. Um, so, for example, I was working with my coach in repair the first time. I'm taking repair for a second time. Um, and she, in her narrative after the interview, the get to know you informational interview, um, pinpointed something that is a true challenge in my life. She was excellent at hearing that and writing a coaching plan. And as we went along, um, what we realized together is like I was not that was too hard for me,
Mhm.
like too painful, too hard. And she was able to work with me to find another piece to work with in the integral coaching framework. And it could have gone so many different ways. She might have pushed harder if she were a different person, or I might have felt like, well, I failed that. That I guess integral coaching is not for me. But she was so sensitive about what I was sharing and why I really couldn't do that work at that time, not never, but at that time, that she could just, almost without it's not to say that she could have taken a pause. I wasn't going to go anywhere, but she was able to just roll with what I was sharing and say like, okay, that's okay. No judgment about that. Let's move in another direction. And so I just um, think we really hit the jackpot when we get excellent, sophisticated helpers along the way.
Mm. Yeah, I have so many people I know in my personal life and in my practice. I've had that experience that Jess was talking about of like cognitive therapy just not really changing things, um, and often, people can go to cognitive therapy and kind of spin like Jess was talking about, like where they're just in the same loop, and I feel like that's where these other models that bring the body into the picture, and really work with the emotions. It's like, well, that's not going to get you anywhere. That's just going to reinforce, what you're already experiencing. And so for me, that was the big aha, was like really getting into the body, like therapies that involve the body, because that got me out of my way too busy mind, and and that's, also I think what occurred to me when you were sharing, Rebecca, is that I believe that for a certain period of our healing, we really need a team. That is not like therapy actually isn't enough. That wasn't enough for me. Like I needed a coach and a therapist. And I also pursued some like alternative therapies on top of that, more like in the spiritual realm and things that like meditation retreats and other, deep kind of inner work. I required all of it, and that's a lot, and it takes a commitment, but it's not for the whole time, but there's some intensive period where you have to make it a priority. I see, at least for, again, if you have that like dissociative type trauma where you're really not connected to yourself. And so, yeah, I try to norm that with people, when I work with people, like, yeah, it's totally legitimate to need a team. And to assemble that team, to help someone assemble that team, to me is like such an honor, to help them find those resources that are really going to support them.
I get that. I myself have and I'll tell anybody any day because I'm proud of it. I have a really strong support system.
Mhm.
I believe that I wouldn't have been able to just get by with one or two of these things, but with I mean, even my school coordinator is part of my support system, and I don't know if she realizes that, but everybody matters in
Mhm.
my support system. It's what gets me up every day. It's what helps me get through. And it's just each part is a really important part of my life. So, yeah, strong
Yeah.
support system.
Yeah, That reminds me of a quote. It's like a Armenian quote that I was told like once when I was really little, which is it takes a tree to feed a family, but it takes a village to raise a tree. So kind of we're getting close on time, so kind of wrapping it up. Kind of wanted to leave that with you guys and like let you guys kind of have that one and resonate with you guys.
Mm,
That it takes a lot to support other people, but it takes a lot to support yourself.
mm, mm.
Thank you all for being here. Um, how are your hearts feeling leaving this conversation?
Mm. I'll start. My heart feels really full. I wasn't planning to share anything about my personal background today, but since others did, I felt like that felt really safe and okay to do that. I was planning to talk more like as a professional, from helping others. So that, so my heart is really full, and it's full with this sense of, I think it's like when Libby was talking about like when she recovered and then she wanted to help others. Like I think that instinct in us that wants to pass it on, that feels like what NI2C is about. It feels like what this podcast is about, like all of this. So that's kind of what's in my heart, is this offering the healing to others and in the same circumstances.
I think I feel just like when I entered the conversation, but maybe more so like curious. I feel very curious, and I feel just kind of excited about the potential and possibility of healing personally and in ripples.
Mm,
I am no longer nervous. I am more relaxed. I feel like I could just keep on talking with you guys. My heart is happy and at peace, and just knowing that people care,
mm,
is a really beautiful thing. So thank you all.
Thank you too.
mm.
You all for being here
Yeah.
and like sharing and being a part of this conversation. You're all amazing.
Mm.